So I hear that Coloradans love openness in government. I hear that we prize it so much that we pass things like the Open Records Act and open meetings laws so that we have transparency, so that taxpayers know what's going on their tax bills, their fees, and what's going on in government. Except when you're sick and you need to be in the hospital, then you shouldn't know what you're being taxed. Minority Leader Hugh McKean, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for having me. So are you suggesting that we would tell people they can't know what they're paying?
I think that's what I'm saying. All right, for people who aren't up to speed on this, I am tired of tax increases being called fees so that they don't ask for consent. And it has become an addiction so bad under the Gold Dome that the voters voted very clearly, if you're going to have a fee and it's going to be this big, you need to at least ask the people. So now you guys are even throwing a finger against that and just passing a bunch of smaller tax increases underneath that level to get away from consent. The big one was a hospital provider fee. First of all, what's the hospital provider fee? Every other state calls it a tax. You guys call it a fee.
So when you say you guys, I often say those guys call it a fee.
You guys.
So the hospital provider fee was something that was come up with, a tax, a bed tax, literally, on hospital beds where the amount collected could be shunted to hospitals that were having a hard time paying their bills because they take in a lot of Medicaid patients or they don't have the chance to perform a lot of elective procedures which pay at a higher rate. And so that was a structure long before I came down here that seemed to be a way to keep the rural hospitals alive. And so I think the hospitals all said, yeah, we should do this. And then it sat there as this piece of our state budget that was quite large. And the problem, of course, when we have things that increase the state budget is they trigger this beautiful thing called a Tabor refund. And so when we would collect too much money under Tabor and the Constitution says we have to give it back, then what we really were doing was saying, you know, we have collected too much, we need to keep government small, we're going to refund that to the very people who, by their hard-earned labor, pay those taxes. And it turns out some Democrats didn't really like that very much.
So they come up with this, well, let's also say some Republicans.
There were some Republicans.
Including Jerry Sonnenberg, who's a co-sponsor on this bill I want to talk to real quickly. But the hospital provider fee is a way to milk more money out of the federal government by taxing Coloradans when they're at their very weakest, when they're at their most vulnerable, when they are in a hospital bed. All right, maybe this is a great idea, maybe this is a terrible idea. I was very angry about it for two reasons. One, the obvious one, ask the people if they want this tax. You can raise taxes as much as you like. All you have to do is ask for consent. But instead of asking for consent, we just do this thing called fees to avoid consent.
I'm going to go you one more. We not only called it a fee, but then in order to not ever have to go ask the people, they took that hospital provider fee and through what we're going to talk about, they created an enterprise. And so they literally removed it from the budget so that they could fee and tax more. And this was suddenly not part of that budget. Right. And it's complicated and we don't need to get into that, but it was a little shell game, right? Follow the P. And in the end, this P went over here and what it really was.
P? What? P?
A small green P.
Oh, a P, all right.
Follow the
P.
So the shell game is always, can you keep track of it? In this instance, what they did was they pulled it completely out, created an enterprise out of it, and then used it to, with all of this Christmas tree gifts of, we're going to work on roads and bridges, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and sort of decorated it as a good thing, instead of what it really did was violate the trust of the Colorado voters.
Let's say I'm okay with that, which I am not. I am violently opposed to growing government without consent. But at least, with a faster fee, I see it on my bill, registration for my car. I see the faster tax. We call it a fee because I didn't get to vote on it. When the mill levy freeze, the new gasoline tax, called a fee, we see it. It's right there.
Hold on. We call it a fee until the governor's having a press conference. And then he says, we're going to push that gas tax off into the future.
Until after my re-election.
So he knows it's a tax.
Right.
Let's just be honest.
Yeah. But this tax, when you're at the weakest, when you're in a hospital, and you go and you look at your hospital bill when you get out, how come I don't see that fee on my hospital bill?
Well, you ask a good question, and one that I was prepared to answer. So this is why. This is the bill that I'm looking at. It was Senate Bill 17267, and it was page 27. I was looking this up last night because I knew it was there, and we all have these things in the back of our mind, and then we have that sudden moment of, aha, there it is. And
It's not even buried in some long, super long technical paragraph.
No.
It's its own section.
It's its own little section.
What does it say?
So it's subpart F, and it literally says, I will read it. A hospital shall not include any amount of the healthcare affordability and sustainability fee as a separate line item in its billing statements.
Shall not.
Shall not.
Not might shouldn't. We urge you to lie to your patients about it, but shall not.
Shall not. We do not want to tell people what this is.
So forget that the hospital provider fee, I think, was a terrible piece of keeping people in the dark because they couldn't vote on this tax increase, this massive $1 billion a year tax increase. But the people who are being charged it directly can't see it on their bill. What was the purpose of that?
Well, I think we know the purpose. In not showing anyone, then it becomes part of this big bill you get. Your insurance company pays part of it. You pay your part of it. Nobody can call it out and say, that's wrong. I didn't receive the service that you're charging me for. I'll give you an instance that really came up in just the last couple of weeks. And it was a news article on Fox 31. And it was a gentleman who took his young child for a behavioral health visit. And they had the visit, so you're going to talk to a therapist, you sit down in the office, you get up from sitting down in the office, and you leave with all the things you came with, right? It's not like a hospital visit where you leave with a little breath thing or whatever. Nope.
Little bag with your slippers in it, right?
You literally walked out the door with all the things you brought in that door. And he gets the bill, and in that bill was a facility fee for $900. Now, I understand how business works, that we have to recoup the cost of providing the office and the heating and the air conditioning and the electricity. And just like in any commercial real estate venture, you parse that out. Here's the cost for doing business here. $900 for an hour's visit.
So next time you go to get a haircut, which I don't have to worry about, you go to the barber, haircut's $12 or $20, but there's another $5 facilities fee, which you thought was actually
there's a facility fee. And I would conjecture, and I don't know this, but I would conjecture that hospital provider fee is buried in that facility fee. So how much of it is the hospital provider tax? How much is there? We don't know because they are prohibited from telling you.
So you and Jerry Sonnenberg, the sponsor of the original legislation.
You, not the sponsor of the original legislation, and this other individual who was the sponsor. Let's be clear. I fought against the hospital provider fee pretty hard.
I'm doing this. I've worked with Jerry. Jerry and I have put 2 tax cuts on the ballot.
Yes, you have.
And it's a pleasure to work with him. He was just wrong on this, and he knows that this was an oversight. That these bills are huge. Legislative Council does these things. It's a big fight. He recognizes, wait, there's no transparency in here. So you and he are sponsoring the world's most simple bill to just pull out that section and say that instead you have to show this tax on your hospital bill.
Just tell people what you're charging them, right? We have bills that require transparency in freestanding ER visits because you should know what this is going to cost so you don't get surprise billing. We have surprise billing legislation that says you should never be surprised by these things, and yet this is called out specifically.
Except when the state does it.
Except when the state does it.
All right, so this simple bill is going to head to its first and quite possibly last committee here in a couple days. It's going to go to the House or Senate? Senate State Affairs Committee. For those who don't know, it's affectionately known as the Kill Committee because that's where, when the President of the Senate wants to kill a bill, you just send it there. Now, it also might be appropriate to go there. Does this have any chance of survival? It seems as though the left that has been screaming about transparency, the left and your colleagues who passed a bill saying that for voter transparency, we're going to mess with citizens' initiatives to say that this is a tax decrease is going to cause birth defects in unborn children. Are they going to pass this one?
So they should. And I
don't
think
see
that's
how
where
they,
we ought
I don't
to
see
start.
how they don't.
I don't either. And that's what I mean. I start with they should. Because I think you and I both approach most of these questions from common sense. What would be the argument not to do this? What would possibly be their rationale to not tell people what they're being charged? And so what I think is interesting is Senator Sonnenberg and I talked about this as this is sort of the ideal situation to be in. Let's offer something that just makes sense. And I think that's what Colorado voters want to hear, is what makes sense. Well, tell me what I'm being billed. Tell me what I'm being billed. Leave the politics of the hospital provider fee at the door. Let's figure out what it is that I'm supposed to be paying when that bill comes to my home. So if Democrats in the Senate are going to be reasonable at all, rational at all, then they should say, yes, let's embrace this. This is a good idea.
The question is transparency just lip service?
100% it is.
Really? I mean, because I believe, and it happens on all sides. It's not like Republicans love open meeting laws. They don't like them when they want to have a private conversation. The CORA law, which is Colorado Open Records Act, is our FOIA Act, Freedom of Information Act.
Right.
And let me tell you, a lot of Republicans and Democrats don't like it when reporters want to look at their emails. I get that. This one goes directly to sick people in hospital beds.
So I don't get that, and here's why. I think we all live our life by relatively simple rules. And one of my rules is that I don't say anything about anybody I wouldn't say to them. And we probably have to have a talk after this. But
No, you've always told me anyway. So.
So that's the problem, right? I don't mind Cora. Because if you live your life truly transparently, then okay, fine. You can know whatever you need to know. And that tends to cut down on the problems you have.
Well, I knew every
outside of
politician
it.
has to say, I love Cora. But
Actually, it causes a lot of time, right? Because you got to go look and did I get these emails? But what you're saying, I think, holds a tremendous amount of water. That is sort of the general transparency that the public should expect. But in people's most difficult times, where they have had to go to the hospital, and we all know that this is a billing cycle that always follows by about 90 days. So you've been in the hospital, hopefully you've overcome whatever it is, or you've suffered a terrible loss, and you're home and the bills are pouring in. And now suddenly you get the $900 facility fee. And it's a hardship. You don't know, how am I going to pay this?
The beautiful
but
thing
at
is
least know what it is.
you end up angry at the hospital, when in fact this is a deflection. The hospital has no choice but to tax you this, and they have no choice but to be silent about why your bill is so high.
Because page 27 says they shall not do this.
Now, there are some hospitals that were just fine with this, and I haven't quite figured that one out yet. But as far as billing, if this was a private operator, and the private operator said, we don't have to tell you what we're charging, why we're charging you, the consumer advocates would be angry. They should be angry about this one. Who's on the State Affairs Committee in the Senate? I don't know if you have that offhand.
I don't have it offhand in front of me, but it's predominantly the Democrat members of the Senate, because they control the Senate right now, and so therefore they've got all the votes they need to kill any bill they want. Hence why it's called, may I do it?
You may.
The Kill Committee.
The Kill Committee. So let me ask you this part. You've been part of a plan called the Commitment to Colorado, which is good alliteration, because if you're going to win, you need good alliteration. And part of this was putting together a bunch of bills that, quite honestly, just show a complete contrast between Republicans and Democrats, and call them on some of these things. One of those bills was this one, which said simple transparency. I think a Democrat, if this ever got to the floor, every Democrat would have to vote for it. They would have to vote for it, which is why I think there's a good chance it'll be killed in committee so as to avoid that. It's still a Democratic kill.
Absolutely. I think if this were to get to the floor, what it would really open up is that conversation about how the state should be just as accountable as a private business or as accountable as we expect people to be. Why should the state be able to play by a different set of rules and say you shall not disclose this amount, this tax? I think we all look at. I remember the words of Rush Limbaugh. We shouldn't pay FICA as part of a payroll deduction. We should write a check for Medicare and FICA and all of the things that are deducted from our check. So we really know what it is. We know what the amount that we were paid for our labor is, and we know what the amount we're left with, and we know where it went in the middle. And that to me is
taxes
this whole thing.
Must be transparent. And that's what's so infuriating about this. And so I'm very curious to see. I've heard lots of Democrats say, well, of course we should take care of that. And then they've never put up the bill to do it. So I'm glad you guys are
Right.
doing this. Also, I've heard our governor talk about inflation as if he's just discovered it. And so the State of the State address, he was crowing about how he's worked to fight inflation. It seems to me when you pass ridiculous tax increases without the consent of the taxed, you are doing inflationary actions. This is another perfect example. Our hospital stays, meaning our medical costs, could have been lower if not for this.
Not just could have been lower, but could be continually lower. So also in this bill are the mechanisms to increase the hospital provider tax and then not call it out. So you might have been charged, I don't know what it is because I haven't been able to look at it, but let's say you were charged $100 5 years ago, and now it's $200. That's called inflation. And inflation is a product not just of what the market looks like. In this instance, it's a tax. And so this inflation might be caused by the even harder times some rural hospitals might be under because they don't get to do all those elective procedures and they have a lot of Medicaid patients. So we don't know, and we can't have that conversation until we do. And I will suggest that, we lived in a hashtag world for a while. And this idea that the voters should consent to being taxed is crucial. It's the central tenet to a representative republic where about these issues we say we need your voice in this so that we know the structure, the swim lane we're in. And I think the hashtag there is did not consent. Hashtag did not consent.
I like that one. All right. Talk to me about affordability in that as this election year rolls around, it's funny to me that a governor who has done so much to make everything expensive in Colorado, who has passed so many tax increases without consent, who has done so many regulatory changes, who has put us on the path of whatever the California governor wants on low emissions and zero emissions vehicles, we have to follow. The one who has put oil and gas out of business. We can just keep going and going and going. It is, for me, laughable that he now cares about inflation.
Well, you have to remember two things, right?
Yeah.
It's an election year. And number two, even multimillionaires occasionally see possibly that the grocery bill went up or that it cost a little more for the person that puts gas in their cars to put gas in the cars. Even multimillionaires have to figure out that life is not just trending on the same level. So maybe that has now penetrated the governor's office to where he's aware suddenly that golly, this is stuff that's real and families are struggling. I'm not sure about that. I think maybe his pollster said people are mad and this is why.
First of all, credit to you and the Commitment to Colorado, who half a year ago said, number one issue, affordability. And now, after the Democrats have made so many things unaffordable, our goal now is affordability. And the disingenuousness of him saying, we're going to hold off on the gas tax increase. We call it fee because
we're just going to make you poor later.
Yeah, we're just going to make you poor later. We're going to push it off until after I'm reelected.
Yes.
How can anybody look at that and not see it for what it is? This is not a caring governor. This is a politician who's just going to push this off.
100%. If you recall what they said back in August when we had our press conference, we stood at a Sinclair gas station because gas prices were very high. And my personal tenet there is it was getting harder and harder for folks to get to work. because they're having to stop and put gas in their tank that's $1 more a gallon. It's $1 more a gallon because we've basically shut down oil and gas production in the state of Colorado. We have made it harder and harder for gasoline-powered vehicles to stay on the road at prices that people can afford. And we've made it harder and harder to claim the right claims about what our air quality is. If you recall, that was one of the worst air quality days in Denver, not because of cars driving on our roads, but because Oregon and California were on fire, and there's this thing called wind, and wind pushes that smoke this direction. And so no one would take account for how much of California and Oregon was raining down over our heads in the form of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, all the bad things that smoke contains, and not blame us for our own air quality. This is a question I asked Casey Becker, the Speaker of the House, years ago on one of her bills. Where is the financial item in here for the glass dome over the state? Because at some point we should figure out what we produce and what we should take accountability for ourselves. And it turns out that wasn't there, unbelievably. But what they didn't want to do was say that we live in this dynamic world. They act like we're responsible for it ourselves. What they said that day, Republicans are out of touch. They said Republicans are out of touch. These aren't the issues people are worried about. People are worried about climate change, which truly we all should be. It was a very warm day. And so I said, it is. It's hot in Denver, and we should all be focused on how we do the best we can for our world. But they also said people are really more worried about all of these social issues out there. And yet what we were saying was the real product, the real social issue, are the things that families are worried about. Number one, it's how can you make Colorado more affordable? How can we pull government regulation back and get rid of some of these fees and taxes? Not push them off into the future, but get rid of them. How can we keep our neighborhoods safe? How can we undo some of the bad things that have been done?
This commitment of Colorado,
Sure.
It sure reminds me of 1994, that there was such a Republican swing in reaction to Bill Clinton's gun control laws, the economy, and Newt Gingrich became Speaker of the House. I feel something very similar, maybe even much larger than that, and that this is going to be a wave election. I don't think there's any way the state Senate doesn't turn Republican. I think it is quite likely that 2 of the 4 statewide offices swing to Republican hands. I've even gone on a limb saying that if inflation continues, and if we have a good Republican candidate who cares more about this election than the last election, Jared Polis could actually be vulnerable, even given all his popularity right now and all his money. Because when people are hurting, millionaires' money doesn't always hit the spot. And this is going to sound crazy. You're not going to believe me. I think in this wave election and the hurt that might be happening in this country and in Colorado, that the Colorado House of Representatives could even swing Republican. Now that is an impossibility numerically. It's impossible by rules of gravity and
I can't believe you even said it out loud.
Yeah. I think it is in the realm. I don't think it's likely. I think it's growing possible. You have always been much more optimistic about this than I. So tell me why.
I think it's likely. And here's
Likely.
why. Likely. Here's why. I think that there are 2 things that dynamically have right now the state in this I think a chance that we haven't seen in 30 years. We have held the House in the last 30 years, but not with a sentiment of people being so much frustrated and fed up with what they've seen. And so take a look. You just mentioned some things back in years when I was still yet young. But we did see gun control bills come out. We saw one of the more remarkable things from Bill Clinton that people didn't really take account for until years later, and that was the Community Reinvestment Act, which really put banks and some other big businesses who were the financial engines of this world on their heels to figure out how are you going to make all these loans that people can't pay back. Turns out that didn't really have a problem until 2008. But what we're looking at today is families are struggling. Families are struggling with what I said. It's too costly to live here. So now, can you work 2 jobs? Can you go back to what we had pre-COVID, which was 2 parents working, kids in daycare, sort of this treadmill that everybody was on. Right now, there's a cog out of that treadmill, and that's childcare. Right? So now all of a sudden, families are saying, well, maybe we can have 2 incomes. Can you go back to where we felt like our communities were safe? Right now, I've got so many officers who are leaving the state because it has become untenable to be a police officer in the state of Colorado. Well, that's shameful. We never should have passed legislation. More importantly, the governor never should have signed legislation that made it harder to be a police officer in the state of Colorado. Do you do better training? Do you do better institutionalizing things like crisis intervention and all those things? Yes. Do you eviscerate the ability for a police officer to do their job? No. Third thing is, parents right now have been through the worst year ever. They have seen their kids, first of all, school shut down, and they had to take over homeschooling, which a lot of parents never figured they would. And then they had this hybrid model where the kids were in school a couple days, they were homeschooling a few days, which again told one parent, I need to be home because my kids are going to be home. And so we dynamically uncoupled the sort of cooperative world of parents and kids and the education, and we really put a lot more on their backs. And teachers, I stand up for teachers in this because they were struggling. How do we teach these kids? Those 3 things are what people are thinking about. And right now, with the districts we have in the House, we can take the House back.
Here's the difference, you poor stupid man, is that yes, people are hurting, yes, people are angry, but Republican image is these guys are against, they're against, they're against, we have no idea what they're for. And that Republicans don't play well together. It's individualistic politics as well. But can the Republicans, can your candidates running for the House, can they make an argument? If you elect us, we will do these positive things.
So the beauty of rolling out our commitment to Colorado, in August we started talking about it. And then the very first day of session, we rolled out 44 bills that are not bills, ideas that we're fighting the Democrats on. These are our ideas for how we govern. And here's the beauty of where we are in this moment in time, is people now have the evidence that the Democrats actually don't know how to govern. They know how to follow ideological pursuits to the detriment of the people they're supposed to serve. And then you pull back from that and you say, all right, Republicans actually have always had better ideas that create more prosperity for people, 100%. And you look at the ideas that we put on the table to make sure that business can succeed and individuals can succeed, and look at that equality of opportunity, not the equality of outcome, right? The opportunity is where it's at. That's what we want everybody to be able to do. So you look today at the 44 bills we put on the table. We gave Democrats the absolute opportunity to come along and say, here are our ideas, here are really good things for the people of Colorado. Come along with us and do this job. And now we see that they're going to kill committees like the State Affairs Committee, which tells me that the ideological pursuit on the Democrat side is much more valuable to them. I think the people of Colorado get to see that. And you say, yes, we're more individualistic. We are. However, that's always been a good thing in that we really hash out ideas. We really talk about all these things. My goal was to find common sense, rational Republicans to run for every viable House seat in the House. And I've done that. That's all I've done for the last year.
What's the deficit in the House right now?
We're 9 seats down, 24 to 41.
That's a lot of seats.
Well, here's the great thing, is in the Senate, there are only 35 of them, and we do most of the work in the House, so they don't really have a ton to do over there. And so really what we say is that the House seats, albeit smaller districts, actually that gives us more impact in those districts. Because when you get down to neighborhoods instead of regions, you're able to really go and talk to people at their door. And I'll just tell you what I hear at every door. Every door I hear, I'm struggling, I want to have more control over what my kids learn and what schools they go to, and somebody down the street had their car stolen or had their car broken into or whatever else. There you go. And so
my next door neighbor
yeah.
had his car stolen in his driveway.
Yep.
In nice Boulder, Colorado.
Nice Boulder. In nice Loveland, where you would never hear of these things, we've had cars stolen. We have windows being smashed. And these aren't by, teenagers out for a joyride. These are organized groups going down streets and seeing what doors they can get into and what they can steal. So we are seeing a shift in the kind of crimes that we're seeing. But truly, you asked, 9 seats. 9 seats sounds like a big deal. But there are seats that we have always been competitive in that we are now even more competitive in. And I will give credit to the redistricting commission. They did their job. They made districts more competitive. And could we have gotten better maps? Maybe. But we got maps that we can work with.
Let me say it differently. There was no way you could have gotten worse maps.
I will agree.
All right, there's just no way. I think Colorado had the most gerrymandered system in the nation.
Do you know my district? My district is this. It's Loveland, Colorado, and the prettiest part of the state because it is. But my current district has this leg that goes out into rural Larimer County, which I love because these are farmers and ranchers that I get to represent, and the fence posts of former Representative B.J. Nichols' house. And when I first heard about this, I thought, no, that's not true. And then I went and looked at a very fine detail of the map, literally her property line, because B.J. Nichols was a Republican representative, Brian Del Grosso was a Republican representative, and through the gerrymandering 10 years ago, they put them in the same district and made them choose. So I usually tell people, if anybody knows about gerrymandering, well, it's me, but it's really B.J. Nichols.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also a great representative.
Yes.
She did a fine job. All right, so let me just lay this out here so that the Senate will flip. I have no doubt about that, and I know everyone's going to take credit for it because that's what consultants do.
Right.
But it will flip. It is a done deal. I believe we will win back 2 of the 4 seats. I'm less certain of that, but of the 4 state seats.
Right.
Treasurer, AG, Secretary of State, Governor. I'm not too sure which ones. I think Treasurer and Secretary of State seem to be more likely. I think this is in the realm of possibility. That is how big this shift is going to be.
This is amazing, and that it is in the realm of possibility is not.
Even that you got me to admit that.
I know. I was going to say, but really, truly, when we look at it, this is not just because of the maps. It's not just because of the economy. It is because really good people have stepped up to say, "I want to serve. I want to give my time and my talents to my community." Take a look at...
Yeah. Let me ask you about this, though.
Hold on. Take a look at House District 50. This is a beautiful example. House District 50 has been this donut hole in Greeley, right? So it's around the University of Northern Colorado. It's always been trended a little more liberal, and we have had Democrats representing that district for as long as I can remember being in politics. We're going to take back House District 50. Partly because of what's going on in the community, but partly because we've got really good people stepping up saying, I want to serve here, I'm from this community, it's important to me.
I've been around long enough that this is what I predict, because you know Caldara's political axiom.
If you support someone, they lose?
That's the second one. Okay. First one is, there is nothing Republicans can't fuck up. And when I see a situation like what we have this year, I'm thinking, well, here comes the Republicans. Here comes Caldara's political axiom. And in this kind of year, what I see are unelectable Republicans that I'd love to see in office, but who are unwinnable in a general. It's what we do so often. It's the reason why we have Senator Bennett representing us here in Colorado. And it also happens on these seats as well. I would love to get these hardcore very Trumpy Republicans in, but they're not electable in some of these districts. And so you've seen it over and over again. You know exactly what I'm talking about. How do you stop that from happening? So
it's a good axiom. I like it. I've heard it referred to as snatching defeat from the jaws of victory. And yes, we see that. What I said earlier has been my mantra and what I've been doing all year. Find rational, common sense Republicans who can serve their district, who can talk to their folks. And we get that a lot. Why are we, don't you want to go out and find the most conservative person that you can possibly find? First of all, I would love that. I would love to have people who roll back things like the hospital provider fee or the ag worker bill or the control the Air Quality Control Commission has over the state of Colorado. And I think we can do that. But we have to be sensitive to what governing really looks like. Governing looks like representing the interests of a lot of people, some of whom don't think like we do. And so having that conversation with your constituents is much more than, this is what I believe, this is exactly what I believe, and I'm voting like I would vote in the voting booth. That's actually not governance.
It's a wonderful answer to a question I didn't ask. So let me try it again, which is, how do you make sure unelectable Republicans don't win primaries?
Well, I'll tell you, I will answer it directly this way. I talk to everybody, and I encourage candidates to go talk to each other. My caucus asked me not to play in primaries, and I don't. I don't go in and say, this is the person we're going to have. What I really think
You don't endorse people in those House seats?
I will not endorse people in those House seats. But what I really make sure is that they talk to each other, and that what they really do is have that talk about governance, have that talk about what does it look like to win, right? We had a Senate debate last night, and I don't know what the results are. I don't think any of us will until sometime later today of the straw poll there. But there are individuals that might be able to win the primary in that field, as you mentioned, against Michael Bennet, who can't win the general, right? And so okay, this might be the one or two issue person you've got, but can they win a general election? Can they speak to the state as a whole? Because when I got elected to be the state representative for House District 51, I don't draw some magical line around House District 51 and say nothing else matters. What really happens is you're now representative for the state as a whole, with the sole interest of the voters that you're going to talk to a lot, but in terms of what the rest of the state looks like. That's what the people of Colorado need to see, is that governance means something. Governance means we take into account everybody's ideas.
That was some wonderful tap dancing.
I don't tap dance so much, but I just answer a question.
The answer you could have just said is, I'm not doing anything about it. And so we're just hopeful that primary voters choose people who can win in the general, the most conservative people who can win in the general.
Absolutely. Because we should trust the voters, right? We should trust the voters to do exactly that. Look out for absolutely what's best for them.
And so far, Republican primary voters haven't done that in years past.
Some have, some haven't. And I think that that's what you always have to look at is, what is that dynamic? And we now have an open primary, which in my frame of reference is something I wish we didn't, because we're a private organization, but it's what we're faced with. And I think actually, once you start having that conversation in an open primary, it's a very different conversation, which is, okay, here we are where unaffiliated voters can choose a ballot. Well, then go talk to them. Go talk to those unaffiliated voters so that they understand what governing with your frame of reference, with your ideas means, and make that case to them.
How certain are you that you're going to be
the new speaker?
Yeah, the new speaker.
Somebody said majority leader, and I'm like, well, I think speaker has a nice ring to it. How certain am I? I'm pretty open with this. We are playing in well over the number 33 is what it takes to control the House. We are playing in, meaning we have viable candidates in well over that number. I think we're going to probably, because of the dynamics of the state, come in pretty close to 33.
Money.
You want my money on the table?
Money on the table.
You know what? I'd throw $10 down and tell you, you know what?
Even money?
Even money.
You're on.
Okay.
Hugh, as always, thanks.
Pleasure talking to you. Thank you for having me.
$10.
$10 on the table.
On the table. Thanks. If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.